Welcome to the Hometown Church Podcast. My name is Jesse Roskamp. I'm joined as always by Pastor Deacon Ailes.
Hello.
And joining us for the third week in a row, Pastor Brent Knox.
Wow, good. It's good to be here. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you so much for joining us. Deacon, what do we got going on today?
Yeah, well, this week we are continuing our walk through the book of Acts, our 13-week series. And, we've been using this podcast to dive in a little bit deeper than we can normally in a weekend service. And so this last Sunday, Pastor Brent, who again is joining us here, he shared the fifth part of the series called In Leaders We Trust. And this last week, we took a look at the establishing of the local church, and we've been looking at that, and then specifically leadership in the local church and how there's some flawed people there. So today we have Brent joining us to talk more about that. And how are you doing today, Brent?
Well, I thought I was doing good, but I'm feeling a little insecure right now as I'm looking at your iPhone for your notes, your iPad, and then I got paper. So I'm feeling, insecure,
Sure.
like I'm pretty fallible and old.
Yeah. Fair. No, that makes sense. No, I wish I had paper, but we made some changes. So yeah.
Cool. Well, thank you for being here again today, Brent. You don't need to feel insecure that you have paper. It's okay. The times are past that, but it's okay. You can live in the past. It's fine.
You can be secure in the Lord, brother.
Well, thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So we got a pretty big topic of conversation today with leadership. This might be a longer episode than normal because there is so much to cover and talk about in general with this. But I wanted to just kind of start off by hearing Deacon and Brent, your guys' experiences as pastors, just your personal experience. Could you guys maybe share a bit of your own story of how and when you became a pastor, and maybe what were the different stages of that, of your being a pastor?
Mm-hmm. I'll go first because yours will probably be a better story.
Oh, I don't know about that, but go ahead, Dee.
Yeah. So I was raised up as an elder, a pastor in the church in February of 2015. And so I'm coming up on 10 years here. Of course, recently, and just this last November, I was brought full-time on staff. So that's kind of a different stage. But kind of leading up to being raised up, I was mentored really, really consistently by Pastor Bill Barnd, who was here back in the day, and he really invested in my life and kind of saw vision and saw maybe, hey, God could use this guy as a pastor. And so he had that in mind as he was mentoring me. And so we worked on those character qualities, those kinds of things. I'm still working on those character qualities. But let's see, what else do we want to talk about? We want to talk about those stages. Yeah, so I was a lay pastor for quite a while until November, where I was hired full-time, and I'm on the teaching team. I do a lot of other things too. Do you want to hear about all those?
Sure, yeah.
Yeah, so I oversee the children's ministry here at Bloomington. I work in tandem with Jim Bosholm, who's a pastor at Lakeville. He kind of oversees all of the locations, and I oversee Bloomington here. And then I oversee the young families ministry, which works pretty well together with the children's ministry. They're kind of part and parcel, but worship leader in that ministry and a lot of things. Youth ministry. Maybe we should take a break, but yeah, that's me in a nutshell. How about you, Brent?
Oh, hey. Well, I'll tell you what, can't believe it when I look back on when I got first recognized as a pastor. I was very young. And as I think back on it, I think, I'm not sure if I would recognize somebody like me, but it was a very young church back at Iowa State University. So a lot of things happened in a short period of time. Within 6 years, I got saved, married, and raised up as a pastor. All that happened within 5-6 years. And it happened, progressively. I was involved in a student group on campus, involved in a small group leading, involved in leading the house church, and then leading the student group, and then things happened pretty quickly. It was a young church. The founding leaders were 30, 35 years old. So everybody was late teens, 20s, and I got recognized as a pastor when I was 23 years old, so pretty young. My first message was 90 minutes long. So you think I speak long now. It was nothing like it was back a long time ago. And maybe that's why I didn't teach much after that for the first 5 years or so.
Got it all in on that first one.
Yeah, it was a yes, I did. Multi-staff church, and I was on the wings doing other things. And then 6 years after I became a pastor is when I moved up here to Minneapolis, and and with our new structure, they will hopefully talk about it a little bit. I'm on the teaching team as a lead teaching pastor, so that's what I do now.
Yeah, it's funny. Before I got raised up as an elder, I was also doing some house church leadership. So maybe there's a thread there a little bit, but yeah, also leading in kind of the young adults and those kinds of things, and heading up that ministry. So I guess that's just the track, huh? Is just young adults. If you do young adults and then house church, and you've got all the character qualities, we got you.
Well, that is a route.
Yeah. That is a route.
Yeah, that's awesome. Another thing, just kind of like along with your guys' story, I'd love to hear is maybe not your greatest, but one of your greatest joys in being a pastor over the years, and maybe one of your biggest struggles in being a pastor over the years.
Yeah. I've been thinking about that, and I think the greatest moments of joy that I've had since 2015 have been watching people and working with people make those steps toward trusting Christ even more, to where you could see an obvious area to where maybe that wasn't happening, and they choose to, and they just see the goodness of the Lord in that when they've made that decision, and now suddenly they're following with even greater commitment, or of course, when people actually trust their salvation to Jesus, like, oh, is there any greater joy? Mm-hmm. So just those things, when you know that you've played even a small part in that, and you got to partner alongside the Lord in just helping people grow and discipleship and those kinds of things, that's certainly the greatest joy for me. Yeah,
I mean, can you beat being involved in a job that actually and sincerely and authentically changes people's lives?
Right.
The only thing I would add is that's related to that is that I get to do a job that's extremely significant, that changes people's lives, but also has eternal ramifications. Golly, you can't beat that with a stick.
Yeah. I mean, I'm sure a lot of people would jump at the opportunity to work with someone really amazing or famous or whatever in whatever field they have. Getting to work alongside God, which we all do. You don't have to be a pastor to do that, but maybe being able to spend more of the time that we get to than maybe someone who's full-time working. It's pretty amazing.
Yeah, just don't forget it has greater accountability.
I know. Amen. So now we'll get to the struggles. No, but for real, let's get to the struggles. Yeah. I think being a more emotional, relational person, I would say that the biggest struggles I've experienced since being a pastor have been when something happens with relationship, and it could be people leaving the church. People that you've invested in, people that you spent a lot of time with, that you've worked through hard things with, that you've invested, and they leave. Sometimes even for good reasons, really good reasons that make a lot of sense. There's still a hole that's kind of carved out of your heart, and it's hard, But then there's times where people don't leave for good reasons, and it just seems harder because, again, you did all the investing, you did all the stuff, but at the end of the day, it didn't seem to amount to anything. And the church is so relational. That's kind of the point.
Right.
And so when people step out of that fellowship, it's hard. It's just really, really hard.
Right. So you're talking about the flip side of the great joy.
Right.
It's seeing people's lives change, but then people's burdens, people's problems, people's issues can really start dragging you down. Mary and I have often joked, hey, being a pastor would be great if it weren't for the people.
Yep.
So I think that kind of summarizes the downside, the struggle.
People can make some life decisions that, as much as you try to help them, they keep making them, and it's like if you're a parent, you're listening or watching it, and you're a parent, you watch your kids make some decisions, you think,
Right.
oh, this is going to hurt so bad. This is going to hurt so bad. Don't do it. But you can't always step in. Sometimes you have to let them fail. Or sometimes you do step in and they still fail. There's a lot of pain. The stakes are just a lot higher.
Right.
Yeah. So it's painful.
Yeah. Well, thank you guys for sharing your experience. And thank you guys for serving the church and being pastors for as long as you have.
For sure.
Deacon, you've been a pastor for almost half my life, which is wild. I hope that makes you feel old. Brent, you've been a pastor for probably twice as long as I've been alive. I hope that makes you feel even older.
Oh, it makes me feel like an antique, that's for sure.
Yeah.
I'm kidding.
Yeesh. No, I'm just kidding.
So let's actually just dive into what the Bible has to say about church leadership, and that's going to be kind of the focus of the rest of this conversation today. What are the different types of leadership roles that we see in the New Testament, and what qualifies someone for these roles?
There are 3 basic offices in the New Testament church: apostles, elders, and deacons, specified roles, offices in the church. Only elders and deacons pertain directly to the local church. The issue of apostles, we're going to save that issue for another day once deacon gets the role of apostles figured out for the current New Testament church, whether or not they're relevant for today or not. And so basically when it comes to the local church, though, we've got elders, and they're responsible for teaching, shepherding, overseeing, governing. And then there's the office of deacons, which that word literally means servant. They are really to serve the elders, and we'll get to this in a little bit, but we hope to revive this office again at Hometown.
Yeah.
Great.
Yeah. Okay. So perhaps the biggest area of disagreement surrounding the leadership in the church today is the question of women pastors. Okay, so could you maybe, Brent, give us kind of an overview of that debate and just where Hometown lies within that conversation?
Well, this will take a lengthy answer because this is a huge topic, but there's basically 2 camps in Christianity regarding the issue of women's role in the church, and there's the camp that's called egalitarian. All right, and that view is that they view that there are no distinctions between men and women concerning roles in both marriage and in the church. And besides just biology, men and women are basically the same with no role distinctions. And historically in the church, that's a relatively new view. Okay, so the second basic camp is complementarian. And that view is that men and women have equal status, equal importance in the eyes of God. Both men and women are created by God on purpose, but they're created differently and have different roles, both in the marriage and in the church, and they complement one another, together expressing the image of God. And this goes back to the concept of the Trinity and what it means to be created in the image of God in the first place. So we got the Trinity, right? We got the Father and the Son and the Holy Spirit, each 3 co-equal persons, but they have different roles. And so back in Genesis, when God says, we will make man and woman in our image, he's referring to the Trinity there, that it takes a community of people with different roles to image God, and that's why God basically created gender. And why? Because gender differences, when they're in community, complementing one another with different roles, that's what, bottom line, displays what God's like. If we didn't have the Trinity, then this whole thing may not make sense. So it goes all the way back to the basic nature of God. So, of course, we know nowadays it's very controversial to say that men and women are different. 25 years ago, very few people would have flinched at that statement. But now To say that men and women are different, that almost becomes dangerous, right? I mean, our culture has been working really hard to break down the distinction between the genders. Men and women are different, and it goes beyond just biology and physiology. And, there's so many questions that people have on this topic. I want to quickly just go point out to a resource that we'll post the link online. And it's a really great resource written by John Piper and Wayne Grudem called 50 Crucial Answers. And they do a very good job overviewing the central concerns about manhood and womanhood. So there's no way that we're going to be able to scratch every itch here. Those 50 questions, though, scratch a lot of itches. So check out that link to that booklet. But here's how John and Wayne summarize a complementarian view. They say this: our vision of manhood and womanhood is shaped by a passion for reality, the beautiful reality of complementary differentiation that God designed for our joy in the beginning when God created us male and female equally in his image. If one word must be used to describe our position, therefore, we prefer the term complementarian, since it suggests both equality and beneficial differences between men and women. We affirm the complementary differences between men and women, and will attempt to describe those differences for the way men and women relate to each other in the most fulfilling way. Then they go on to say, I enjoy what Larry Crabb calls, quote, enjoying the difference, unquote, namely that sexes are distinct in what they were fundamentally designed to give and what brings them the greatest joy in relationship. At the deepest level, a man serves a woman differently than a woman serves a man. So that kind of
sets
it up. Gender counts is the point. Gender makes a difference, and especially in home life and especially in church life. And I also like a statement from the Village Church in Texas, Matt Chandler, if you've ever heard of him. He's the lead pastor, and he says this: first, both men and women are created in the image of God and equally charged with the cultural mandate and the Great Commission. They're equally charged. Mm-hmm. The shared humanity of men and women is greater than their sexual distinctions. The primary relationship in the local church between men and women is the relationship of brothers and sisters united in Christ, not subordinates. That's what's primary. So what we share together is more important than what makes us different. There are to be no gender wars, okay? Mm-hmm. But then he goes on to say, second, though, equal involvement in the church between men and women does not entail interchangeable involvement. Though we affirm the absolute equality between men and women, we believe the Bible places certain restrictions on women in ministry. Therefore, we believe that certain church responsibilities and roles are reserved for men. So the $20,000 question then becomes, what are those restrictions? And how does that work out in our church responsibilities and roles here at Hometown? And there's a lot can be said on this, but a large part of this really honestly comes down to a certain passage in 1 Timothy 2. And 1 Timothy 2, verse 11, it says, women should live quietly and submissively. I do not let women teach or have authority over them. Let them listen quietly. For God made Adam first, and afterward he made Eve. And it was not Adam who was deceived by Satan. The woman was deceived, and sin was the result. So much could be said on those verses there, but it points out the restrictions. I do not let a woman teach or have authority over a man. And in other words, what does that restriction mean is what there's a lot of discussion about, and what how we see it at Hometown and how many other churches see it as well, is that's equating the restriction to the office of an elder, where that would be the most naturally seen as a position having authority and teaching in an authoritative type of way. So eldership is not open to women, how we understand that passage. And I know that's a tough statement, and it flies in the face our current culture, but sometimes we just have to bend on what we see, what the Bible has to say, and appeal to the wisdom of God.
Mm-hmm.
So that's an overview.
Getting into more of some practicality, we at Hometown have a lot of super gifted, incredible women who, and I think maybe there's two ditches, right? There's someone who's trying to get right to the ceiling and break through a ceiling, but then I think that there's also a lot of really gifted women who maybe stick towards the floor because they're worried about stepping on toes, or they're worried about going too far. And I don't think there's any way we're going to get into all the boundaries or role differences or anything like that. But I guess maybe what would you say about a woman who's maybe one, super gifted, maybe even with leadership or some communication, some teaching gifts, and is maybe stuck there at the floor because she's just worried about stepping on toes? Like how could we encourage, I guess is my question.
Well, you're asking a huge question on spiritual gifts, and it's a factor to consider here with this whole discussion is spiritual gifts, and spiritual gifts can press against the issue of gender distinctions, but the Bible doesn't seem to indicate any women or restrictions of certain gifts towards women.
Right.
So what does a woman do with a spiritual gift of leadership or a gift of teaching or communication? Some churches see spiritual gifts as trumping gender distinctions. However, the complementarian view would be that gender distinctions trump spiritual gifts, but there is so much leeway on how certain spiritual gifts could be expressed. I think there are women who have a wonderful gift of leadership that, it could be expressed in their home, could be expressed in a small group environment, could be expressed in a ministry environment.
Yeah.
I mean, the only thing that we're saying here is that eldership is a ministry for men, and so we'll even be exploring that with the office of a deacon, and feel that the role of a deacon could be open to women.
Yeah, we do have a number of scriptural examples, even in the New Testament, of some pretty incredible women. Priscilla is like the first one that comes to mind because, she did, in some ways, depending on how you look at it, she kind of exercised some authority over Apollos, right? I mean, she taught him in some ways alongside her husband, and they worked hard to help shape a man who had a huge impact in the early church. And I don't know where we'd be without Priscilla. And there's a lot of ladies in the church today that I'm like, oh man, where would we be without these ladies? So I appreciate, there's no way we can get into, okay, well, here's all the boundaries. They can do this, they can't, but I appreciate you just taking a little bit of time to, I think hopefully it was an encouragement just to lay that out a little bit.
Yeah.
And
I think for me, this was a topic of conversation that I felt very unsure of for a long time. Just because there is so much discourse around it, and a lot of times it can start to feel personal when accusations are being made on either side about who these people are, or what they think and how they think is wrong or how they think is right or whatever. And there's just like a lot of information and confusion surrounding it. And I think sometimes it can come down to a question of, well, is this, like we talked about last week, of like contextualization? Is this one of those issues that is supposed to be contextualized for the first century, but now it's no longer in play, and it's open to people, and there's just a ton of scholarship and just a lot of confusion. But I think it's important to remember that whichever side of the camp you fall on, you are still a brother and sister in Christ, right? And as long as your ultimate goal is to serve and honor God, if you're right or wrong on this issue, if that's your main goal, then at the end of the day, we're still brothers and sisters in Christ, and remembering that. A resource that I found extremely helpful, if you have a lot of time, is Mike Winger's series on YouTube and podcast for Bible thinkers is what his podcast is called. He did a whole 12-part Women in Ministry series where he went extremely into depth on all of the scholarship, looked at both egalitarian, complementarian, patriarchal views on all of these issues, and really did a good job of evaluating it, going in depth on where those things are. So if you find any confusion and you want more resources, you can obviously talk to the pastors here and have those conversations, or you can go look at that. I'd highly recommend that. It's about that resource.
40 hours worth of time.
Yeah, I was going to say, how much time did it take? 40 hours. If you've got 40 hours, you can work through it. Or you can go to that resource that we're posting online, 50 Crucial, and get a pretty good treatment of the biggest issues.
Yeah, and Mike Winger lies right in the same spot that John and Wayne arrived at through their lens of looking just, all right, well, let's just look at what the scriptures say instead of what I like to is Mike Winger says, I really wanted to be egalitarian because it's so much more comfortable. It seems so much nicer. I really wanted to be that, but I couldn't. He did do a summary.
He did do a summary video. So if you want to start with that to see where kind of some of these issues land, and then
that 4-hour summary video.
It's a 4-hour summary video.
Was it really 4 hours?
There's timestamps in it, so you can jump around to whichever issues. And then if there's one that catches your eye that you want to learn more about, he provides all the links to go back and watch all that stuff. So yeah, a lot more could be said about the women in ministry, women as pastors conversation, but I think we can maybe tie the bow on that for now for this conversation. And maybe move into the hometown leadership structure and how we view leadership. A few years ago, Hometown went through a pretty big restructuring of leadership. I was wondering if you could just take a little bit of time to kind of break down that leadership structure for us.
Yeah, well, 2019 we moved from independent campuses to working together more efficiently and cohesively. And when we made that change, a number of changes occurred. And by the way, guess what I found out during that time? That people don't like change. Anyway,
surprise.
We moved to a more unified teaching approach. Our previous model was really way too hard for our support staff. Communication was really difficult, and that led us to form a teaching team. We streamlined our decision making, and that led us to more of a senior leadership team approach, which now we have the senior leadership team, and that's a team of co-equal pastors who are making decisions about the whole. And Rob Bussey is the chairperson as the executive pastor of the SLT. Campus pastors are on the senior leadership team. I'm on the senior leadership team. Then we got campus pastors who everyday decisions of campuses are made by the campus pastors. You know, Tim Weber at Bloomington, Mark Stiglitz at New Hope, and then Mike Langlois at Lakeville. And then we've got the whole governance board, which we call the Council of Elders, went super big. Policy decisions or governance decisions go to the whole Council of Elders, and that includes our lay pastors. So that is basically an overview of the structure.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, that's helpful. Within that structure, so since we have people on a senior leadership team, we've got executive, but then we've got lay pastors and people who aren't a part of decisions. And I know the answer to this, being an elder here, but are the elders really co-equal?
Well, since you're not on the senior leadership team,
right,
why don't you answer the question? Because it might make you feel like you're not a co-equal elder.
Sure. So I would say, yes, we are. There are decisions that I'm not a part of that I could easily bog down, that I don't really need to be a part of. When Brent talked about the Council of Elders, we have had some decisions since 2019 that all of us have had to weigh in on, and I think that's been a sweet time, and those decisions take a bit longer, because we're trying to arrive at kind of like we want to be on the same page. But I think that we would call it delegated authority. I have authority that I have through Scripture that I am held accountable to by the Lord. And so within this leadership structure, really all of us as elders, even down to the lay pastor, we delegate. Hey, why don't you guys make these decisions, these basic decisions, or on things that you're really involved in, and we'll pastor these other people in the flock, and we'll have authority over these other different things, and then maybe there will be a time to where we all need to weigh in on something. But I would say we are co-equal, even though it looks a little bit different from day to day.
So you'd say maybe like a complementarian view of equal in value, but different in role.
Yeah. But not true complementarians, since of course none of us are women, but yeah.
Complementarian-esque.
Yeah, definitely true. Yeah. And that's probably where it boils down more to what we were talking about with gifts is there are people in what seem like perfect roles who have the gifts to fulfill those roles. And prior to 2019, we had people wearing 10 different hats because things just needed to get done. And that was bogging things down and causing probably some frustration and some pain. And so...
Yeah, you can't overlook that. I mean, that's one of the most important parts, I think, of the structural changes that's allowing pastors to focus in on their spiritual gifts better. I mean, I remember when I was, before 2019, when I was the pastor here at Bloomington, I was wearing an executive hat and a teaching hat, and it was honestly it was too much. I just didn't feel like I was doing either very well. Mm-hmm. So Rob is wearing the executive hat better than I was, and it's allowing me to focus in on the teaching in ways that I think are better now than they were. So
yeah, and we've got some pastors here who like just live and breathe shepherding,
right?
And
that's a good point.
They also seem to have a big capacity for relationship, for people, and just this ability to really love people in a way that I don't as much. And so you can just see, wow, that guy has 10 people he's building into and knows their lives really intimately. And, some of us can handle more, some of us can handle less. So there is this beautiful complementarian-esque thing happening that I think is allowing us to be maybe more faithful with God's flock, with his sheep, than we have in the past.
Oh, there you go.
Yeah, that's good. You kind of broke down most of the leadership here of who we have, with Rob as the executive pastor, the lead teaching pastor. We've got Kit and Deacon and Spencer all on the teaching team, and then the three campus pastors, Mark and Mike and Tim. And we also have a number of lay pastors. Could you give us kind of like an overview of who they are and what they do as well?
You just came from the lay pastorhood, Deke. I'm going to let you. I'm going to let you tackle that.
Well, there are some other pastors as well. Of course, we have Jeff Gruen.
Yeah,
right.
We have other people like that. So the lay pastors at Bloomington here, we have John Shelkoff, who does a lot of teen ministry, young family stuff, and a lot of other stuff, a lot of discipleship. And then we have Joel Fredericks, who was just raised up here around November, and he's in a similar camp with teens and young families. We've had him teach here a couple times here from the weekend service. We've got Jim Bosholm, who is at Lakeville, and like I said, he does a lot of the children's ministry direction, but he's also pretty involved with young families as well over there at Lakeville. I believe that. Oh, and then we have Eric Cram, of course, the chiropastor, yes. Who does chiropractic. No, he does a lot of parenting stuff. Boy, I don't know where I'd be without Eric Cram with my parenting, and same with John.
And your back, probably.
Yeah, and my back. Yeah, actually, I need to see him tomorrow. But anyways, yeah. So we've got him, but then so then we have Jeff, who's also on staff. I think is Mark technically retired? Mark Bowen?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. So that's something we can talk about another time too. But does a pastor really retire? Are they still pastors? Another time.
They don't retire, but they just get tired.
Yeah, and less money. Yeah, in fact, none.
Yeah. Cool. Yeah. Thanks for breaking that down. And one question that has popped up a lot in conversations around leadership with Hometown is when we say we have this belief in plurality in leadership, right? We have the different structures, the teaching, the campus pastors, the lay pastors, and there's plurality in all these areas, except at New Hope, the one campus that only has one pastor represented. In both of Lakeville and Bloomington, we have multiple pastors representing different areas, but with New Hope, we only have the one pastor. So I guess maybe you could talk about that a little bit. What's going on there?
Well, first of all, let's just say that plurality is a principle, but it's not a command. So there's no command in Scripture that says thou shalt have multiple pastors at every gathering called a local church, but it does seem like a principle that's worth paying attention to. Will there be situations where that may not be able to be applied? Yes, for various reasons. Now, at New Hope, and since I know Mark Stiglitz very well, I know how he would answer that question. He would say, I'm not alone. He would say, I am part of the senior leadership team. I am wrestling with leadership questions along with other men. We are significantly sanding one another's sharp edges off. And then he would say, I am not carrying the teaching burden at New Hope. And there are other teachers coming in, and I get to allow them to carry that burden instead of myself. And then then he's in relationship with other pastors. Like, for instance, Mark and I get together almost on a every other week basis just to sit down and talk and find out what's going on with one another's lives. So Mark would not say that he is alone.
Yeah, that's awesome. That's great. Yeah. When you really look at how the role of an elder breaks down, it is good to see that Mark is so involved. I mean, and how often does the SLT, the senior leadership team, meet?
Every Tuesday for 4 hours.
Yeah. So it would be hard to say that Mark feels alone when he's surrounded by you guys every Tuesday for 4 hours.
Yeah.
So
he probably would think I'd rather be more alone.
Yeah, perfect. Yeah. Okay, well, so we talked about deacons briefly. So I would love to just see, do we officially recognize deacons? Why or why not?
Well, we at least recognize one in this room.
Hey, I was waiting. I was waiting for a deacon joke.
I was waiting for the day that I could call you Deacon Elder.
Yeah.
Or Elder Deacon.
Yeah, either one. I answered to both. Yeah. Yeah. Or goofball deacon.
Goofball
like
deacon,
yeah.
Which may be more accurate.
Yeah, certainly.
But not biblical.
Breaks down to gifting, I guess. Yeah. Yeah.
So the question is, do we believe in the office of deacon, and do we practice it? Well, over the years we've had depending on the location, we've had a on, off, on relationship with the office of deacons. And various reasons for that. But we're right now currently taking a very close relook at that biblical office of a deacon, and are very close of flipping the switch and reinstituting the office of deacon here at Hometown. As a bona fide recognized office of a person who serves in some specific and significant ways.
Sure. So why now? What has spurred that decision to say, hey, let's take another look at this?
Well, nothing significantly different with the church. It's just that it's in the Bible, and it's in the Bible for a reason. And if we are people who consider ourselves Bible believers and Bible doers, then we probably ought to really think highly about, hey, maybe this would be a useful office because it's there. And why is it taking so long? Well, because wheels turn slowly here, even with a more speeded up organizational structure, things still move slowly. So, one step at a time, we're getting there.
Sure. Yeah, that's helpful.
For sure. Yeah. Have you guys ever been a part of a church community or anything like that does officially recognize deacons? I don't know if you guys have or not.
Well, the Bloomington location officially had deacons.
Okay.
How long ago? 5, 6, 7, 8 years, 10 years ago, something like that. But
doesn't seem like that long ago. Yeah.
I'll bet it was. I'll bet
five,
it was 10,
or
I was even 10 years.
maybe 10.
Yeah. But yeah. And it's just there's some challenges. Basically, it's just challenges to keep the office alive, keep the office significant, keep the church even knowing who the deacons are. Basically, that was the issue with the Bloomington location is that we got it started great out of the chute, and after a while, it just got forgotten.
Yeah, and I think it does also seem there's probably a couple different ways you could approach it, right? You could look at, well, what's the ministry need, and then take a look at deacons that way. And sometimes it's who are the people of that kind of character that's recognized in 1 Timothy, and then take a look at filling a ministry need. So I think sometimes things can probably ebb and flow depending on what people are doing and what the ministry needs are and that kind of thing.
Sure.
Yeah. Yep. That makes sense.
Yeah, for sure. So kind of as we're getting closer to the end of this conversation, when we're looking at the greater church, and this was kind of a focus of your sermon this week, it seems like there's more and more big name pastors being called out or stepping down or having some sort of controversy surrounding them. Why do you think that is? Why do you think that's so common for church leaders to fail? And maybe what are some of the big stumbling blocks for pastors today?
Well, first of all, makes me wonder if that's more common than it used to be or not. I think we're just privy to the information more than we are used to. But I do think that there are other things that are afoot. There's a lot of cultural pressures that are affecting the church that could go without saying. But one of the big points that I made in my message was that I just wonder if the Western approach to recognizing pastors might have an inherent weakness in it. And the inherent weaknesses are I think in the Western church, churches have valued gifting, skill. They've valued education. And so if you can check those boxes, someone who's a very talented communicator or a very talented leader, and maybe has got some credentials behind their name, some abbreviations behind their name, then you got yourself a very good pastor. And what has been tended to be overlooked in the process is the character issue. And if that gets overlooked, or it becomes number 3 on the list after those two things in importance, then I think the process may, by mistake, elevated people who may not have thorough character qualifications according to 1 Timothy 3 and Titus 1. Yeah. And eventually that cracked foundation is going to have some folks fall through it.
Yeah.
It'll crumble.
Yeah, it does seem, and you talked about this at length, but it does seem difficult even in, some churches will have kind of some lengthy, we come and teach and get to know the congregation and stuff, but I don't know, even in a year, which I don't think it's ever that long, that period, but right. I don't know in a year how you'd be able to really tell, well, what's their family really like? What struggles do they really have? What have been some of those past hurts and relationships? Are they really above reproach? I don't know how you figure those things out.
How does a
interview
person
process.
react under pressure and, all that stuff.
Yeah, that's difficult. So I've appreciated that that is one of our core values here at Hometown, is kind of raising from within, that concept even of every member and minister kind of pulling together to do that. So I've appreciated that. There's a lot more on core values that we could talk about too, but some of that's on our website. You could look if you've never known what they are. I think they're there on the Hometown website.
Yep.
Yeah. Okay. Well, anything else that we wanted to talk about with that specific question? Otherwise, we've got some listener asked questions, which I'm really excited to dive into.
We got our first listener questions to include on the podcast.
And we've got a few of them. Yeah. And they're good ones.
They're really good ones.
Really good ones.
Brent, are you ready?
Yes, sir. I'm ready and willing.
Perfect.
All right, yeah. Well, our first question comes from Joel, and he asks, I'm curious about your thoughts on the influence of John Piper, someone you actually mentioned earlier as a resource. The influence of John Piper and the fruit we are to look for based on Spencer's message. His son Abraham has 100,000 followers on YouTube and oftentimes is quite harsh and critical of evangelicals and Christianity as a whole. Mainly wondering if someone like John Piper should be influencing us based on what we see from his son. And I added here, I think that the heart of this question kind of comes down to one of the qualifications we see for elders in Titus 1:6, having to do with the elders should have children who are believers. So should pastors and elders step down if their children walk away from Christianity?
Well, the key question and the key word there is children. And the most people, vast majority of people, would look at the qualifications of 1 Timothy 3, Titus 1, when it's referring to a pastor's family. He's managing his family, manages his family at home. If the, quote, children are still in the home, that's one thing. But once a child grows up and leaves the home and they're no longer a child, then, they're really not under the influence and the management of the father anymore. And, there are children that grow up, become adults, then they get influenced by other people, other trains of thought. They make their own decisions. They make their own way in the world. And at that point, it's generally considered that, a pastor may continue to have some influence, but he can't manage a child when the child is not living at home. And I'm aware of John Piper's son, and I went through my own issue with the same way with one of my sons who for a while went off the rails, and people wondered if I were to be still recognized as a pastor, and after a lot of consideration and thought and discussion, it was he was outside the home making his own way in the world, making his own decisions. And you can't be responsible for another person's decision making.
Yeah. Yeah. And especially as it comes to being a believer or not, ultimately we recognize that there's a spiritual aspect to someone giving their life to Christ, to trusting in Jesus, that goes beyond our own capabilities as parents, even as parents who are pastors. Yeah.
Yeah, I think when we kind of just back up and take a look at the Bible as a whole, it would make less sense of the rest of the Bible to say, a pastor needs to make sure that his son believes, because you can't change anybody's heart. You can't. Yeah. If their heart is hard, there's nothing you can do about that, right?
Right. You're only responsible while they're living in your home, managing your family at home. After that, it's kind of up to God.
Yeah, and even contextually, we would probably say it has more to do with, especially in 1 Timothy, it has more to do with just how the man is managing his household. Yeah. And if his kids are given to disobedience or wildness, how is he managing that? How is he taking care of that? Because people can get a little wild and disobedient in a church who aren't children. And how do you shepherd and lead through that? And are your children who are in the house, are they like openly rebellious? Are they really fighting against the church? Are they fighting against the faith very openly? Well, I think that would be some cause for, we should take a look at this. We should talk about this.
Yeah.
So,
I do think I was kind of having this thought as you're preaching on Sunday, it is kind of interesting that pastors' kids have a reputation of being rebellious and kind of the crazy ones out of the youth group and stuff like that. Not specifically to our youth group, just kind of in the general
it's a kind atmosphere. Of a cliche that PKs are the worst.
And just kind of an interesting observation there. But
it's kind of a recognized in the sense that they're in this fishbowl that everybody's looking at them and everybody's kind of watching their lives, and they feel the eyes on them, even as a preacher's kid. So there is a little bit extra pressure, I think.
And since it is a qualifying factor of the elder itself, there's probably maybe more pressure in that sense that you might not have just for the regular mom and dad who love the Lord, who are a part of a church, though there's a little bit of pressure there either way, but yeah.
Cool.
Yeah, okay, so thank you, Joel, for sending in that question. Good conversation. So then our second listener, Brent, he said, if a local church raises pastors from within, how does such a church protect against groupthink and long-term theological misdirection? How do they diversify both the type of people in leadership and the outlook they have on where the local church should concentrate its efforts? That was a really good question.
Yeah, it is a good question. And, you've heard the term barn to blind, it's, I guess it's an agricultural term that that you don't see as a farmer the weaknesses of your flock or your cattle anymore. And I think it is a potential weakness. I mean, this is I think Brent's pointing out a really good question, and it's a significant thing to think through. And it is a weakness of recognizing from within that maybe you've got you can't see weaknesses, maybe you can't even see strengths anymore in a church because everybody's looking through the same lens, and I think that needs to be recognized, and I think that weakness needs to be compensated for the best that you possibly can. One is that pastors ought to be turning to resources outside their group think from time to time, getting consultants even to take a look at the church, which we've done in the past, going to different seminars where we're being exposed to different trains of thought, our own reading. We need to work hard on thinking beyond the bubble that we're living in. And but yet, I kind of think, what's the alternative here? I think even though that's a potential weakness of being barn blind, I'd rather still be recognizing people from within the congregation so that we can have a better assessment of character. I think if I had to choose one, I'd still choose recognizing within. And, as we were talking about this earlier, you often brought up, Deacon, that when you actually get into the blood and guts of a pastor's meeting or an SLT meeting, you really begin to recognize there's a lot of diversity here. There's a lot of diversity of thought. There's a lot of pushback one way or another, that there really isn't as much as a group think as you might think. So there's it's like parents behind the doors. Mom and dad often have a different view of the world. Yeah,
that was a very visceral way to put it, the blood and guts of our meetings. But it is so true. We disagree on some things. We agree on the major things for sure, but that's where some of that beautiful plurality of leadership, and even just saying, this is a thing that's minor enough that I'm going to set that aside, and we can keep moving forward. But in our conversations, we certainly do sharpen each other. We certainly do pushback, and this has come up in theological stuff, in just average running a church stuff, and even just how we approach some of our own personal lives. It's been a really cool thing. I also think that, well, there's people in the church, many people in the church have been willing to share some things or challenge some thoughts, as I think people should feel that they have the freedom to come up and talk to us about things. That's kept me honest. But yeah, in the same way that we should, take the scriptures and say, hey, I'm gonna put my own traditionally held beliefs aside and just see what it's actually saying, and not try to make it fit what I want it to fit, but change how I view things. We kind of do that as elders too.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think this was something that I kind of was stuck on for a little bit, was kind of this idea of, they all think the same, and I'm the only one that thinks different than anybody else in this church, and recognizing that there is a diversity of opinions. And like, even thinking back to like the LDC meetings that we have, and we'd have that first year, we'd have conversations on some of these big theological topics, and we'd have conversations that lasted a while of people going kind of back and forth, because there's a lot of different opinions out there, and we kind of had to work through a lot of these things. But yeah, I think that's good.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, so then he's got another question, which is equally amazing. Thank you so much, Brent. But he says, there are leaders in the church who do indeed report further down the organizational chart than pastors and elders. So, for example, he says, there's ministry and small group leaders. How do the topics in your sermon, Brent, apply to these people? Are they held to the same standards, but just aren't like leaders, quote unquote? Do we accept more flawed people? How does all that work? It's a great question.
Well, it's part of the mess of a church right now. It is, and it can get messy. The basic premise that I shared in the message is that trust matters, right? Trust matters. If you're going to influence people need to trust you, and trust by and large just rests on character. So character matters with any person in a church who's exercising any kind of leadership, whether it be ministry leadership, small group leadership, whatever. But as we already just got done talking earlier about the difference between elders and deacons, the qualifications there between an elder and a deacon aren't as great. And presumably, since we have small group leaders, that's not an office that's designated in the Bible. There's no list of character qualifications for a small group leader or ministry leader in the Bible. Well, we would presume that they would not need to have quite the same character as a deacon or an elder. Otherwise, we may not have very many small group leaders in the church. We want to be able to give responsibility freely to people, and for people to have the ability to step into those things and use their spiritual gift, if they got a gift of leadership, for instance, or shepherding, to serve in the church. And so we don't want to make the bar too high. On the other hand, if there were some really, 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 glaring issues that would cause a person not to be above reproach or whatever, then we'd be concerned about that, because we're trying to build trust with people.
Yeah.
So the character qualifications wouldn't be as great, but they're not insignificant.
Yeah. So in other words, if a person were leading a small group, there are basic principles that speak to character and sin and these kinds of things, and we would not have a person who's openly living in sin, right, lead a small group. We would work with that person, love on them, help them. But we recognize too that the office of an elder, that has greater authority, and it also has greater accountability by God over the church than the office of deacon, and the qualifications biblically there in 1 Timothy 3 are different, similar but different. And then we recognize too, past there, that I want to say the stakes aren't as high, but that seems like I'm minimizing, and I don't mean to in any way, but the stakes aren't quite as high. There's not as much authority there, and there's people placed above them in authority for their good. That's the elders, the deacons, these kinds of things, who can help work and safeguard and protect. So definitely, there's regular people all along all of the authority structure in our church. There's no superstars. We're all flawed people. Just some of us are looked at under a greater microscope because of the accountability, because of the authority. But yeah, we want flawed people leading because those are the only kinds of people.
Maybe this is a kind of a curveball question, and don't feel the need to be specific here, but have there been times where we've had to deny someone the ability to step into a small group leadership role, or ask someone to step down because they didn't meet whatever level of qualifications we had for them?
Yes. That's specific, but yes, I've especially working with young adults and working through those kinds of things, there have been times to where some of it has been, I appreciate your eagerness, I'm seeing these things, and so let's wait. Yeah. Let's wait before I give you influence. Let's work on something.
It's unhealthy for them, and it's unhealthy for others, and
yeah,
someone has got to call that shot.
Mm-hmm. And that's actually true in music ministry too. I mean, there have been times, hey, you're on the stage, you're representing the church, and it's a pretty important thing, even if you're back there playing this instrument or that instrument, and people have stepped down or made those decisions. We're called to a standard.
Mm-hmm.
So, but yeah, I've personally been involved both in like hey, don't lead yet,
mm-hmm.
wait, and let's work through these things and see if God brings you to that point. And I've also been involved in, we're going to need you to, now's the time to step out. Painful, but good.
Yeah.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. Brent, how about you?
Good.
Yeah.
Wonderful. You said it well.
Thanks. All right.
Cool. Yeah. Well, is there any final thoughts?
I don't have any final thoughts. I think I've given my final best thoughts for today.
Yeah,
mm-hmm.
I think we've solved the leadership issue in the American church, and
right. What else can be said after all those answers, right?
Well,
so much.
Thank you guys for sending in those questions.
Mm-hmm.
We love taking your guys' questions. It was the first time we actually got to do that. We were supposed to have a Q&A, so we had some other questions. We weren't able to get to that episode, so this is the first time we got to include some questions. But we want to answer you guys' questions because, like we said last week, this is a podcast for you guys. We want to have these conversations for you guys. So we want to know what you guys are wondering about, what you guys are wrestling through. So keep sending those in as we go through this. Send them in quick. Send them in when you can. We'd love to answer as many questions as possible through this. But for now, that's all we've got for you. Thank you, Brent, for being here again today.
Wonderful.
Yeah, and thank you guys for tuning in and listening. Be sure to share this podcast with people who you think it might benefit in the church. We want to reach as many people as possible with this, and we want this to be as great of a resource for people as it can be, and allow God to use it however He wants to use it. And so that means people got to listen to it. So yeah, I think that's all we got for you. We'll see you next time.
See you later.
All right. Bye.